Hello students, this is the second video of chapter number 1, Tracing Changes Through the Thousand Years. Let us continue with our chapter. So now, historians and their sources. Who are historians? Historians are basically people who read and write history. So now historians use different type of sources to learn about the past depending upon the period of their study and the nature of their investigation. Last year, for example, you read about rulers of the Gupta dynasty and Harshavardhan. In this book, we are going to read about the following 1,000 years from roughly 700 to 1750. You will notice some continuity in the sources used by the historians for the study of this period. They still rely on things such as coins, inscriptions, architecture, and textual records for information. But there is also considerable discontinuity. Discontinuity means change. There has been a change in the sources that the historians are now using. The number and variety of textual records increased dramatically during this period. Textual record means the number of books that were written during this time have increased. They slowly displaced other types of available information. So basically, we get most of the information about this time from the books that were written by the people of during this time. Now, a very important thing about this period is that through this period, paper gradually became cheaper and more widely used. Now, let us look at this box, the value of paper. Compare the following. In the middle of the 13th century, a scholar wanted to copy a book, but he did not have enough paper. So he washed the writing of a manuscript he did not want, dried the paper, and used it. Now, a century later, in 14th century, if you brought some food in the market, you could be lucky and have the shopkeeper wrap it for you in some paper. So we see in the first case how paper was a very rare commodity. People were reusing the paper. And in second, paper became very common. Okay, even the shopkeepers were now selling their food in the paper, showing that now there is no scarcity of paper. Paper has become very common. Okay. Now, what were the things paper was used for? People used paper People used paper to write holy texts, chronicles of rulers. Chronicles means stories of rulers, letters, teachings of saints, petitions. Petition means complaints and judicial records, and for registers of accounts and taxes. Manuscripts were collected by wealthy people, rulers, monasteries, and temples. So, manuscripts, another very important source of history, they were collected by wealthy people, rulers, monasteries, and temples. Now, they were placed in libraries and archives. They what? They means manuscripts were kept in libraries and archives. These manuscripts and documents provide a lot of detailed information to the historians, but they are also very difficult to use. Why are they difficult to use? Because of the language. The language is not a common language, and most of these manuscripts are not in very good condition to be read. Now, looking at the word archive, archive is a place where documents and manuscripts are stored. They are kept safely. Today, all national and state governments have archives where they keep all their old official records and transactions. Okay, let us continue. So, there was no printing press in those days. So, scribes are the people who used to write. Their only job was to write. Copied manuscripts by hand. If you have ever copied a friend's homework, you would know that this is not a simple exercise. Sometimes you cannot read your friend's handwriting and are forced to guess what is written. As a result, there are small but significant differences in your copy of your friend's work. Manuscript copying, making the copies of the manuscript, is somewhat a similar task. As scribes copied manuscripts, they also introduced small changes, a word here, a sentence there, etc. These small differences grew over centuries of copying until manuscripts of the same text became substantially different from one another. So basically, because of the process of writing or copying through the hand, a lot of changes were happening. A lot of mistakes were made by the scribes. Why? Because even scribes, they were only human beings. Now, this became a serious problem because we rarely find the original manuscript. Basically, we do not have the original manuscript of the author today. We are totally dependent upon the copies made by later scribes. As a result, historians have to read different manuscript versions of the same text to guess what the author had originally written. So you can see how the work of historians is so hard. On occasion, authors revised their chronicles at different times. The 14th century chronicler Ziauddin Barani, please remember the name Ziauddin Barani, wrote, and he was during 14th century. He was a chronicler. Chronicler are the people who write stories or who write history. Wrote his chronicle first in 1356 and another version 2 years later. The two differ from each other, but historians did not know about the existence of the first version until the 1960s. It remained lost in large library collections. Now, look at this figure number one. It is a painting of a scribe. You can see this person is writing, he is a scribe, making a copy of a manuscript. This painting is only 10.5 centimeter by 7.1 centimeter in size. It is very small. It is because of its small size, it is also called miniature. Okay? Miniature. Miniature paintings were sometimes used to illustrate the texts of manuscripts. They were so beautiful that later collectors often took the manuscripts apart and sold just the miniatures. So, another important thing which emerged during this time was miniature paintings or very small paintings.